Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. My name is Amy Petro, and I'm here with Jennifer Fromholtz. We're both Spanish teachers at Washington High School in Massillon. And we did a book study on our cultural responsive teaching and the brain by Zaretta Hammond this winter through the ESC. And we are just going to share a little bit about the book today with you. So I want to share with you. So this is what the front of the book looks like, and if any of you have the book and are going to kind of follow along, we'll share some
Page numbers.
yeah page numbers as we go along. And this is really just going to be kind of a conversation between Jenny and myself. But as we were doing our book study, these were our goals, basically. To develop an understanding and shared language around these culturally responsive practices, um, and you can kind of read through those. Um, and these are the contents of the book. So it was split up into three parts, and then kind of 9 chapters, and then also an introduction, epilogue, a glossary, all kinds of references, and then also an index. I think we met 4 or 5 times for at least an hour. So, we're only going to talk for about a half hour or so. So we're just going to,
We are just basically touching the surface of the book. And we're not even going to talk about every single chapter. We're just going to talk about our big takeaways. So there's so much information we talked about in 5 hours, and we're going to give it to you guys in about 30, 40 minutes. If you haven't read the book, it is an amazing book for you guys to read.
and just to kind of before we get into our takeaways, I'm looking at the foreword here, and it says neuroscience research has substantiated um, that we are all wired for expansive learning, high intellectual performance, and self determination. All of us are. So the question is, why are so many students of color underachieving? Why is there such an achievement gap? And that's why we did this book study. And the big thing to remember is that cultural responsiveness, it is not a practice. It's just going to inform our practice. It's going to help us make better teaching choices. Um, and we're gonna go over some different strategies with you. And like I said, we're basically just going to go through our big takeaways from the book. And
Things
go
that
ahead.
I was gonna say things that we feel like you guys can take right now, and like even though obviously it's summer, but things that you could implement like day one, or ideas and concepts to make you really think about it over the summer to maybe change how you approach some things in your classroom.
There are definitely a few things that I will not ever forget about this book. And I know when we were doing the book study, I would come back the next day and talk about it with my colleagues. And someone asked me, they're like, is this book like changing your life? And I was like, yeah, I think it is,
Yeah,
how I think about teaching and my different practices. So yeah, so we're excited to share with you.
awesome. And like I was telling her the other day during BLT, I referenced it so many different times because there are so many different things that I wanted people to understand. Sorry, that's one of our bells. Um, and I did. I reference it all the time because I was like, this is such a good book. Like, I feel like everybody should read it. All new teachers should read it. So, all right. So let's start with our first one. So between each of our takeaways, we kind of have some different quotes. They're not necessarily quotes from the book, but they are just quotes in general about the topic. So the first one is preservation of one's own culture does not require contempt or disrespect for other cultures, for Cesar Chavez. All right, so our first takeaway that we have is about understanding what culture is. Um, so that was a big one to me, and so that was kind of like the first one that we decided to pick out. Um, it says ironically the solution for closing students' learning gaps in the classroom is tapping into their culture. And so it's important to understand exactly what that culture is. Um, you know, Culture is how we make sense of the world. And so in order for us to understand a student, we got to figure out like where they're coming from. Okay. We have three different levels of culture. We have surface, shallow, and deep. And normally, or you may have seen before, the iceberg figure, but we're going to look at a different one. So the one we're going to focus on is a tree, and this is the one that Zaretta Hammond talks about in her book. So the first one is the shallow culture. I'm sorry, the surface culture. So this is the culture where we can observe that, or sorry, the one that we can observe. So for example, like food and music, how people celebrate holidays. This one has a very low emotional charge. Um, and has like a really low emotional like impact on trust, because it's just kind of like just what you see on the outside. Okay. And then we're going to go into the shallow culture. So the shallow culture is kind of like the trunk of a tree. And so this includes like concepts of time, like if people are always on time, or if people run late and that's acceptable in their culture. It also talks about like ways of handling emotion, eye contact. For example, if you have a student who never makes eye contact with you, it might not be that they're being disrespectful. It might be in their culture, like it's considered disrespectful to make eye contact with an adult, and especially maybe a teacher or somebody in, a higher authority position. Whereas here, sometimes Americans get annoyed if people don't look at them in the eye. They take that as being disrespectful. So, that's a big call for, culture difference there that we have to be aware of.
So the shallow culture, it is really emotionally charged.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like you can really like lose trust with someone if
Yeah. And those are like the unspoken rules. Like those rules we don't talk about. Like in Spain, like when we go to Spain, like they stand really close together in lines.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh my gosh, like where's my personal space? But they don't have a concept.
It causes like social problems.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Because we expect personal.
Yeah, we have our personal bubble.
Right. We got our hula hoop around us. That's our personal space. But in other countries, they don't. So, and then the next one is a deep culture. So this is really where we make sense of the world ourselves. This is an intense emotional impact on trust. This is where we get our worldviews, decision making, concepts of self, relationships, spirituality. Like, so those are the real deep pieces. But this is also where that culture shock can happen. And in that regard, like if there's a huge culture shock, that can trigger fight or flight. And you want to make sure that we don't want to, invoke like the fight or flight on students. Like we want to make sure that they're comfortable so that they don't shut down.
They don't get the amygdala hijack, which I'm going to talk about in a second.
Exactly. And so that is like a really big, deal, because these are such an intense thing. We're kind of looking through our books as we go through this presentation. So I'm trying to make sure that there's not anything else in here that I missed that I want to make sure I tell you guys, because, I highlighted pretty much 90% of the book.
You have to talk about the individualism and the collectivism, because that was a huge thing with culture.
All right. So let's go to the next slide. So you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, but I have so many different cultures in my classroom. Like, how am I going to deal with all the different cultures and keep up? Well, the key here is not that you're looking at the surface culture, or even, you need to make sure you make sense with the shallow culture. But what it is you really need to know what the deep cultural differences are. That's going to be key. Excuse me, key to understand. Key is, I'm sorry, to understand how culture guides the brain. So, like, you need to get a good idea about the deep culture. So that brings us to the cultural archetypes. Did I say that right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And that's collectivism and individualism. And so what we find really interesting about this is how, based on where you live and where you grew up and what the culture is, some cultures are more collective. And so they have more emphasis on relationships and interdependence and cooperative learning. They want to help each other. Like that's how they survive. And then you have some countries that are more individualistic. And so here, and those are, they focus on more individual achievement and independence. And as you can probably imagine, us here in America, we're like at the top of the list with individualism. And what we found interesting is that in our book, there's another figure on page 27 that shows the cultural dimensions index, which was created by a cultural psychologist. And so they kind of gave on a 100-point scale, they were evaluated on like how individualistic they were. And so we scored 91, so we were at the top. But Guatemala scored the absolute lowest, and they scored 6. And here in Maslin, as I'm sure with many other schools here in Stark County, we have a huge Guatemalan population.
Hmm.
And so that kind of changes how we think about how we work with the students, because for them, working independently is not even how that's not their norm.
Yeah, that's not how they function well.
No, not at all. And so we have to kind of take that in consideration, and do more cooperative learning, and letting people work with partners. And
So that is a problem sometimes in other classrooms because, if a teacher doesn't understand that, I guess in that culture, they consider maybe if they're helping someone with their homework, giving their answers, they consider that like helping and, don't see anything wrong with it. Whereas here in the United States, that's a big no no. So
yeah.
that is,
And I have an example of that. After me and Amy were talking the other day, I thought about it. I have a student that's in one of my classes, and they were working on an assignment together. And I remember watching the student, like, he was just going over every single answer with the kid he was working with. And I thought to myself, like, and I caught myself because I'm like, I wonder if that kid is even doing any work. Like, not the Guatemalan kid, because he was giving all the answers. But the other kid, I was like, is he just like sitting there because he wants all the answers? But my Guatemalan student was so like comfortable and looked so happy and was like enjoying this, because normally he works by himself, that I didn't even say anything, because they were talking, and he was actually going out of his element and probably felt more comfortable than he has in a long time.
mhm.
So okay, and there's a really awesome figure. If you do have the book, on page 26, there's a chart that really shows the differences between, individualistic societies and collectivism societies. Um, but we have so much information to touch on that we
Yeah.
kind of have to keep going. But
So our next quote says, "A nation's culture resides in the hearts and in the soul of its people." So I'm going to talk about emotional self management. This is chapter 4 in the book, which starts on page 52. Um, and so I'm going to talk about building self awareness, to us as teachers and identifying our triggers. Okay. Um, so I mentioned earlier that I was going to talk about what an amygdala hijack is. So, what initially attracted me to this book, obviously the word culture, because we're Spanish teachers, and then the word brain. I really, love brain based things. So, guys, the amygdala hijack, basically it's the RAS, which is responsible for alertness and attention. It basically scans your surroundings, okay, 24/7 for any kind of changes in your environment. It's like a smoke detector, as she says in the book. So it's looking for anything that might cause any kind of social embarrassment or any kind of emotional pain. And then when something is detected, we get hijacked. Okay, which means we are put into a fight, a fight or flight mode, which Jenny mentioned earlier. Um, so as as a teacher, okay, in our classroom, it's important to know that we're the emotional thermostat in our room. I think you've figured out already. Your kids in your room will act like you do. So, that's important to know. If we can, self manage our emotions, and teachers, give our students the tools to do that too. We can, it's just like, we're
it
just going to
helps keep
help.
the classroom calm. Like, if
Yeah.
we come
In
in,
life.
yeah, if
Yeah.
we come in and we're all worked up, then our students are going to feel that, and they're going to be worked up as well. And so the goal is to keep, like, if you need a calm classroom, then we need to keep calm.
Yeah, and just in life,
Oh,
these are
absolutely.
great strategies. So, how are we going to reduce the possibility of getting hijacked, of getting our amygdala hijacked? Um, so there are some common triggers. Okay, and I'm going to talk to you like kind of what the trigger is and what the threat is. Okay, and this is for us as well as our students. I kind of want to think of it on both sides. So these are social interaction elements that activate like different threats in the brain. And once again, if we're threatened, that RAS is, constantly, scanning our surroundings. And, if we're threatened, we're going to go into that fight or flight mode. So the first one is standing, and basically, standing is like your importance relative to others in your social network. It could be your coworkers, your friends, and it's about how other people perceive you, whether it be negative or positive. So the threat is basically being expelled from whatever that group is. That's what our fear is. Being ostracized. The next element is certainty. And that's our need for clarity and predictability in different social situations, to make the right social move, like just to know what to do in different social situations. It's our like knowing what to like what is going to happen next, to predict
Hmm.
what will happen, like what different routines and stuff.
Hmm.
So what the fear there is like being out of control, or like are you going to feel unsafe because you don't know what's going to happen. So that is the threat there. The next element is control. So basically this is talking about control over your life, um, the control over an outcome of a situation. And the threat there is like fear of someone telling you what to do, where to go, how to behave, that is inconsistent with what you believe in. Just like the example that Jenny gave, like about that collectivism and
Hmm.
individualism. um if those students, that is in their, what was the deep, what
The
was
deep
the,
culture.
yeah, the deep culture. That is who they are. And if we're, that is what they believe. And that is a huge threat, us
Yeah.
telling them not to do this.
That's a
And
culture
then,
shock right there.
yeah, and then that is a threat. And there's going to be a definite amygdala hijack there.
Hmm.
The second to the last one is a connection. Basically, connection and security with other people, with your family, with a peer group. And once again, the threat is losing that connection with another person, being excluded, being an outsider. And the
Yeah.
last one is equity. And equity is basically just having a sense of fair, just, non-biased exchange between people. And the threat is um, feeling that, a group, whether it be a class, a linguistic group, whatever, being subjected to an unearned disadvantage, or someone earning like an unearned advantage as well. Um, so those are the different threats. So we know that, you guys, emotions are contagious. Okay, that's what I said earlier, is that we are the thermostat in our classroom. So you guys, if one person in our classroom gets hijacked, okay, it could be us or it could be someone else. It's really likely that someone else is going to get infected as well. So we just have to be careful, to take different steps to calm your amygdala. So there was a strategy shared in here. It is the SOTA strategy: stop, observe, detach, and awaken. I thought it was kind of cool. I just wanted to share it real quickly with you. It's basically a strategy for gaining control of your emotions when you feel triggered. Um, so if you are able, this is on page 67 in the book. It says, if we are able to put as little as 10 seconds in between the time we get triggered and a reaction, we can preempt an amygdala hijack and avoid responding negatively. So that 10 seconds. So basically, the stop is okay. So I'm going to think of myself as a teacher. Okay. Something happens in my classroom, and
Like,
sometimes horrible things happen, things that, really make us upset. Um,
Yeah, like for example, if a student comes in, they didn't realize they had a test or a quiz that day, and they're like super upset about it, and they're getting really loud in the class. Like, how would we apply that to this?
so the first one, stop, is just saying, just stop and pause rather than act in a habitual way. So maybe a habitual way might have been, well, you should have known, blah, blah, blah. So
Mm-hmm.
just stop and pause. Stay open minded, which just means like be open to another point of view, a different way of doing things. Um, you know, don't allow certain cultural displays like trigger you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The next one is observe, which means just check yourself. Okay.
Yep.
Use the 10-second rule. I have to do that at home with my kids sometimes. Just take a breath. So it takes the stress hormones 10 seconds to move through the body to the prefrontal cortex. So this is the pre-hijack stage. So the cortisol and the adrenaline are just beginning to kick in. That you still have time. There's like still a little bit of wiggle room to listen to your wiser self. So try to describe to yourself what's happening in neutral terms. Just take that 10 seconds. Then the D is just detach yourself. Sometimes we get personally invested and take things personally. This kid is yelling and screaming, we're taking it personally. Just shift your consciousness, like detach yourself. um,
Think about pretty ocean
yeah, I
pictures.
think okay, so that's why I put that picture right there. Yeah, just yeah, okay. And the last one, awaken. So when your amygdala reacts, it's because you guys were just trying to protect ourselves. That's what our body does. Shifting focus from yourself to the other person in front of you helps you wake up and become present in the moment. Try to see that other person as someone with his or her own feelings. Um, so you guys, that's a soda strategy, and it's described on pages 67 and 68 in the book. I thought it was kind of cool. Um, so
All right.
yeah.
Next one. All right. So this quote says, "Cultural differences should not separate us from each other, but rather cultural diversity brings a collective strength that can benefit all of humanity." So our next takeaway is talking about rapport and affirmation. So basically, here we have we're going to be talking about relationships. So relationships are key to being a culturally responsive teacher. Like it's critical. Like if you don't have a good relationship, then it's just not going to be successful. You're not going to be able to decrease that achievement gap without that relationship piece. So a quote from the book that stood out to me, it says, "The only way to get students to open up is to show authentically that we authentically care about who they are, what they have to say, and how they feel." Um, and that's going to help us build a culture of care to get our learners to move from like dependent learners more towards independence. Okay, which is basically a learning partnership, and that's what we're trying to build here. So I want you guys to think of the equation. I'm looking at page 75, just in case you were looking along. Um, but I want you to think of an equation. Rapport plus alliance equals cognitive insight. So each part of this learning partnership is going to be essential, and you can't have rapport but not alliance and think that the kids are going to be successful. Like you need to have the whole thing. It is in this phase that we help our students acquire the tools to become independent learners and to expand their intellectual capacity. Um, but the big thing is here is that when we have the rapport, we're going to try not to, um, have an amygdala hijack, because once you have that trust, that's really, where it's at. So let me go here. Okay, so how to build rapport. So first of all, rapport in general is basically defined as a sympathetic connection with another person. So that's what gives you that warm, like friendly feeling when you meet them. And so we need to focus on making sure that we build that so that you're making that emotional connection and you're building that trust. Um, let's see here. I think I pretty much covered this all real quick in that first one, but the last point on this page, it says cortisol stops all learning for about 20 minutes. and stays in the body for 3 hours. So basically, if they don't trust you, and they fear or they mistrust you, like this, that fear is going to activate the amygdala, and it's going to release that cortisol hormone, and then that hormone is what's going to stop all the learning. Like 20 minutes, like they're not going to be able to learn anything, and they're going to stay, the hormone's going to take over, and it could stay up to 3 hours, and so they're not going to be able to hear what you have to say. um, so trust, though, it deactivates the amygdala, and it's going to block the release of the cortisol, so that's really important. And then this one, it talks about like how can you increase, like what can you do to improve your rapport with your students? What exactly does trust look like? And so this figure from the book, and these are different trust generators. So they give you some different ways that you can reach out and help build that trust, like selective vulnerability, familiarity, similarity of interest, concern, competence. Um, I'm not going to read through it all because obviously we have to stay under a time, but you could always pause this, and then you can, read through them, because this is really interesting information. And, one of the big things is talking about, like, sharing challenges that you've had growing up, or something that you've experienced. I know the other day I talked to a student about what it was like to be a first generation college student working, and we talked about like how I had to work through college. She's going to be a first generation college student. And we talked about like what it's like to work through college, because I had to work through college and she's going to have to too. And, that's not always the norm. But some strategies to help with the rapport, though, and I'm looking on page 85 here. There's a couple different things that you can do. Make sure you're expressing your care in nonverbal ways. Um, so when you're listening, like, don't multitask. Look at them directly. Use good body language and facial expressions and hand gestures. Like, you know, I want to say, what did I read? It was like
Yeah, as language teachers, we know like 70% of
70%. Yep.
communication is nonverbal.
Exactly. And so that's really important there. Find time to have fun in your classroom. Like, even if it's just a 5 minutes of playing like a silly game, or just sitting and chatting with them, but like they need to have that fun interaction with you. And also commit to practice affirmation. Like, make it a thing to make sure that you can um, something to affirm in each. It says here, make a commitment to finding something to affirm in each student related to his culture, gender, or linguistic identity. So you need to praise them.
Um, you guys, we're going to move on to the next one. But if you do have the book, or if you get the book, you have to read about the bonding hormone on pages 73 and 74. It's really cool. But we're going to go ahead and move on. So, strength lies in differences, not in similarities. You guys, I'm going to talk about an being an ally for your students, and why students need an ally. And our goal is, basically to take our students from being dependent learners to independent learners. And what are we how do we do that? We're there to provide resources for them, to provide assistance, you know basically to develop their learn how to learn skills, and basically to like support them throughout this process. um, so this is chapter 6 that we are looking at. And um, let me see. Um, in general, um, there is, our education system has underserved our culturally and linguistically diverse students. Um, Many of them have, lower skills, just unable to do higher order, academically challenging work. Like I said earlier, there's the underdeveloped learn how to learn skills. So, and, have been passed on grade to grade, without these skills. And, um, sometimes I feel as a teacher, I'm like, am I, guilty of this? Do I have I set lower expectations? Um, but take a look at the quote I put up here. So, what looks like lack of motivation in reality is the student losing hope that anything can ever change because the academic hurdles seem insurmountable. Um, that, like,
It's
you know
huge.
what that looks like in your classroom. Okay.
Absolutely.
That looks like, you know, a kid with their hood up and their head down, or, watching YouTube.
And
Um,
just like being in their own little world, daydreaming,
yeah.
and a
And you're
kid who's
thinking they just don't want to do
right.
anything.
And it's really just a lack of confidence. Like they have lost that confidence because they just don't think they can do it. So they give up.
So, what this leads to, you guys, is so just a couple things I want to share from here is this learned helplessness. So, basically, these students believe that they have no control over their ability to improve as a learner. So, I don't believe I can do it, so I'm not even going to try. Um, it's like basically the opposite of having an academic mindset. And like I said earlier, unconsciously, am I reinforcing this as a teacher? Am I praising a student for just completing something super simple? Um, am I just setting low expectations? Um, and I feel like I do sometimes.
Yeah, I think that we all do sometimes.
Yeah. But basically, the student believes that trying is useless because, sometimes if I fail, I'm going to look dumb. Okay. I'm going to look dumb. Then I'm going to have this, then the amygdala hijack. And then, it's
And
just
then
a
it just
nasty,
starts
yeah.
everything.
Yeah. Then it just is a nasty cycle. And then this also could trigger a stereotype threat. Basically, this is a racially charged amygdala hijack. So they become anxious about their inadequacy, whatever it might be, and then, okay, so I fail. And then this confirms my negative stereotype. Okay. Whatever that stereotype is. Um, and you guys, this is on page 91 in the book. And this is also a form of internalized oppression. So this is basically, they internalize these negative messages and then start to believe them and lose confidence. So, that really stood out to me
Yeah, it's like
in
a
this
cycle,
chapter. Yeah.
and it just keeps going unless we step in and really be that warm demander.
Yeah, that's a great great
Yeah.
segue here.
So
So every man's ability may be strengthened or increased by culture.
and so that's going to bring us into becoming a warm demander. So basically, what this is there's different types of teachers. In general, though, our role is to offer emotional comfort and care.
And
And
if
so,
you can right now, if you can just pause and
yes,
look at these and see where you are. It's really interesting. You're probably not in just one.
yeah, you could definitely be like in two different ones.
And you could probably pick people in your school building and put them in each one.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when I took this for the first time, like I was like, oh my gosh, I'm totally a sentimentalist. Like that's me. And I was like, I see myself some pieces and a warm demander, but I'm definitely in the sentimentalist category as well. So I'm on that left side of the chart here. But what we need to be is a teacher needs should be hard carrying. So hard carrying is basically the combination of high expectations for academic performance that a teacher places on students and supportive instrumental relationships between students and teachers. So like if you guys remember, there's probably quite a bit of movies that you guys have seen growing up too. Movies such as Dangerous Minds, Stand and Deliver. Those are all example of warm demanders.
They had
And
high expectations,
absolutely. And they really stood up for their kids, but they really
but the kids knew they loved them.
yeah, and no matter what, like they stood and they, made sure that they did their stuff.
And they weren't going to accept less from them.
Exactly.
They knew they
Which is kind of crazy because those were my favorite movies when I was younger.
Right.
All right, so on the next page, so again, so what are you? If you haven't taken a minute to look at the chart, take a second, look at it, and see where you are. There's so much more that we could talk about in this. But we have to try to make sure that we continue on because the next part has so much more information that we need to give you. But again, so try to be that warm demander. Work on that. Make that one of your goals next year. What can you change to put yourself in that box? Because I definitely have some things that I need to work on
Oh,
myself.
me too.
So,
So, trust is the glue of life. It's the most essential ingredient in effective communication. It's the foundational principle that holds all relationships. So, I'm going to talk about planning and instruction. So, basically, as we plan, we should plan instruction so that students move through the brain's three stages of informational processing, which are input, elaboration, and application. What I'm going to talk about is what ignite, chunk, chew, and review are, and then kind of give you some examples in each category of kind of what it means. So, you guys, igniting is basically getting your brain's attention. Okay. It's basically announcing to your brain that you're going to start a lesson. So, some examples of igniting are if you do a call in, some people do a call and response. Um, it basically activates your RAS and generates that your mental energy and focus. It can ritualize. If you're going to start a certain subject, you might play a certain song. So you can use music, you can use quotes, you can do like semi structured, like a talk activity,
mhm,
like basically. Just making your brain pay attention, and getting it ready to learn.
mhm.
The next one is chunk, basically making information digestible, which we're definitely not doing today. We're giving you too much
Yeah.
information. So, presenting information in small digestible chunks, we did choose 7 things, which is good, like to
Mhm,
share with you. Um, so, the goal is 7 plus 1, and um, that way you can connect current knowledge. So, basically, what it said here is oral cultures rely heavily on the memory system for learning. Your brain, you guys, can only hold a certain amount of information. So you need to feed your students right-sized bits of information. So that's why it's called chunking.
mhm.
Guys, in the 7 plus 1, that's why your phone numbers are 7 digits, and zip codes, and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
So, and I think for us, I think I give too many vocabulary words. I think,
Yeah.
as I reflect, sometimes I think I give too much information. I need to do better on chunking.
Yeah.
Um,
Same.
you guys, chewing. What is chewing the information? It's basically taking time to actively process the information. So, you guys, a visual for this one is a coin counting machine. Okay. So, imagine yourself like you're putting all the coins in, you're just pushing the coins in, putting them in, putting them in, putting them in. And then at a certain point, the screen flashes and it's like, stop, wait, I'm processing. Like, I can't take anymore. And it just stops. So, what she says in the book here is that our so we have 40-minute classes, 45-minute classes. um you guys, our brain is going to work the same way. It's going to, when it's at full capacity, it's going to cycle down. So our brain can take in information for about 12 to 20 minutes before it cycles down for 5 to 10 minutes in order to process what it just took in. So, in order to be a culturally responsive teacher, we have to understand this. We have to have some unstructured think time and different cognitive routines. So, what can we do? Like, what does that look like? We can do. Did I put some things here? Yeah, I did.
Sorry.
Um, did I put? No. What? Don't look at that one next. Okay. So, what does it look like? You could do drawing. You could do a writing
Writing.
prompt. You could turn to a partner and talk through what they heard.
Right.
There are so many different things, but basically, just process everything that they just heard.
And then just continue on.
You guys, in the review, this was really interesting. So your review is basically, um, it's basically just for deeper processing. You're just applying your new information. And this review should be done within 24 hours. It's basically kind of like the use it or lose it.
Mhm.
And as you can see here, what she says in the book, so within 20 minutes, you remember only 60% of what you learned. And within 24 hours, that's only 30%. But okay, if you practice it within 24 hours and then practice it again later, you remember 80% of it. So, what does that look like? Did I put? Um, so we can,
37. It's on page 137.
oh, okay. Um, you can do some review games. Um,
You can solve like mysteries, real life problems. You can work on long term projects. Like just trying to use that information.
yeah.
So
Sorry, we're like going through this so fast.
That's
So
okay.
Zaretta says, go ahead, Jenny.
As teachers of culturally diverse students, we need to educate ourselves about the realities of structural racialization in society and recognizing how color blindness is just another form of implicit bias. That's a pretty powerful quote to kind of sit and think about. To conclude our presentation today, and like we said, I know we only touched like the very
This is the tip of the iceberg.
yeah, like
We're like,
surface
blah, blah,
level
blah.
stuff. But one of the quotes that stuck out to me in the conclusion, it says the problem of the achievement gap won't be solved by simply trying to motivate students of color to become more engaged learners. We have to focus on two-tier learning. What are the strategies that we can use to help dependent learners do complex things, and how do we build our own teaching practices in order to help them? So hopefully in this, you're able to answer maybe one of the two of those questions. Um, but she gave some simple in her epilogue. Um, she gave some ideas for some things that you can do right away. Like, how can you lead for equity in your school? So, here's some ideas. You can open your classroom doors and share new ideas and practices. Be open minded. Participate in school level inquiries, to that question unproductive practices. So, if you don't agree with something or you don't think something is the right practice, like kind of speak up. Work on creating positive relationships with students' families. That's fairly important. Look at data and strategize ways to reduce the predictability of who succeeds and who's going to fail. Specifically look at your students of color and see what's going on there. Build your will, skill, and capacity to engage in hard conversations about race, implicit bias, and structural, racialization. Like that in itself is hard, but we need to do it. We need to be champions for our students, and having those hard conversations is going to get us there. Lastly, interrupt instructional practices that produce dependent learners. Focus on more culturally responsive techniques. Remember, our goal is to take our kids from being dependent to independent learners. And lastly, don't forget, you are a big piece of your students' puzzle. Each teacher and every person that these students meet become a part of their big, huge puzzle, of life. And, we're just one little piece of it. So
And I love that Jenny chose this presentation background with the different colors and the different puzzle pieces, and it just speaks to this. It was perfect.
yes. So thank you so much, you guys, for listening to us, and we hope to that some of you guys will tune in for our conference, I guess,
Unmeeting.
unmeeting. I know where we can sit and chat about stuff and what you found interesting. So thank you so much. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you.